So if you don't want your listener to bounce off the podcast or your viewer to bounce off the YouTube, there's 5 key things that you're definitely going to have to do. You're going to have to do all of them, or else you will lose that listener. Let's dive in.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster. It is your host, Adam A. Adams, and this is part 2 of how do you keep listeners engaged? How do you keep viewers watching the YouTube? Remember, you can go back 2 episodes from this episode number, and you'll hear a lot about what to do specifically for YouTube. We talked about thumbnails and some things that you want to use within the thumbnail, the images and the script. And we also talked about multiple camera angles, how many you should have and where they should be. We talked about proposing the question on the screen for your YouTube channel and even what to wear and how to approach the podcast episode. However, there's some other things that you're going to need to know that are specific. There's 2 different parts. There's part 2, how do you really keep people on the audio experience? It's different from the video experience. And last, we're also going to talk about today, what are some things that basically go to both the audio experience and the video experience? So let's dive into things that are mainly for the audio experience. And the first thing that I want to talk about is teasers. So a teaser is a short clip that happens in the beginning of the podcast, like even before the podcast ever happens, and generally even happens before you have an intro or an outro. So talking about teasers, you can utilize these on the video experience as well, or just the audio experience, depending on your listener and your avatar. When my team does the editing and post-production for podcasters, we do a lot of that for 60 or 70 different podcasters. And when we do, we make sure that we always do this 17-second or less teaser, which normally we take from the center of the episode or somewhere in the middle of the episode that was compelling and got some curiosity. Remember on the previous episode about keeping viewers watching and listeners listening, really talked about this hook story offer, what to do to be able to maintain the people. Let's talk about these teasers. We take this 17-second or less thing that came somewhere in the middle of the podcast that is compelling or incites curiosity. That's what we talked about last time, incite curiosity. And remember that the teaser, usually if you have got a solo episode, it's going to be you. If you've got an interview episode where you're interviewing a guest, the teaser is normally going to be the guest. So just remember that. It's 17 seconds or less. There is science-based evidence to show that the 17 seconds or less is the sweet spot. And you want to find something compelling that incites curiosity. And again, if this is a solo episode, it's going to be your voice. If this is an interview episode, most of the time, it's actually going to be your guest's voice on the teaser to be able to get people excited about what they're about to listen to. So that's what a teaser is. And you can absolutely use that on the video experience. You do want to keep the video experience as short as possible. So if you've got a teaser on the video experience, you might even think about even shortening it even more, if possible, or getting rid of it if you don't think you need it. That's okay too. Or I know this is a lot, depends on your avatar, making the teaser a little bit longer where it is 30 seconds or a minute on the video experience, not specific to the audio experience, but on the video experience, you could use a little bit longer teaser and then get into the intro. Now let's talk about the intro. You've got an intro and an outro. Some people call it an intro and an extro. Whatever way that you want to say it, one brings you into a podcast and one exits you out of the podcast. So during an intro, you want to keep this as short as possible. For our podcast clients, we really work to try to get their introduction to 15 seconds or less. And if you go back 2 episodes, you will remember we talked about the motivation, what would happen if I offered to give you a vitamin to make you healthy, or if I offer to give you something to solve your problem, like a Tylenol or aspirin or ibuprofen, to take away your migraine, for example. Most people aren't really going to jump up and get excited about that vitamin. Most people are going to do everything in their power to go and find a glass of water so they can take that pain medicine so they can get rid of their migraine. So we want to be thinking about that during the intro. This is 15 seconds or less, and it needs to speak to your perfect avatar. Now, there are some differences between the audio and the video experience. With your intro, you're going to think, I want to try for 15 seconds or less. If I can't do that, if it's impossible for me to make it 15 seconds or less, maybe I can do 20-ish seconds or at an absolute max 25 seconds on very small case-by-case basis. You want to really try for that 15 to 20 seconds at max range for your intro, and it needs to speak directly to that avatar. And that's specific to the audio experience. When we talk about the video experience, we usually want it even shorter. What I'm saying is the video experience needs to really pack a punch even more than the audio experience. And here's the reason why. If somebody's coming to the video experience, normally what they're looking for is maybe they are subscribed to your YouTube channel. But normally they type in the content that they're looking for, and then they look to see what YouTube generates and puts in front of them. And then they'll watch multiple different ones. And they usually try to get to the shortest ones possible. Most people, they will look for the 3 and 5 and 10 minute episodes or YouTube videos before they look at the 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 minute, 90 minute videos. They'll normally search for a topic that they're looking for, and then they will go for the one that they think is going to give them the best punch. That's what normally will happen on YouTube. What normally happens on the podcast experience is they are already your fan. They found you. They're staying with you for a while. They're listening to a lot of your episodes. On YouTube, they continue to have these, what's the best way to say it? YouTube basically puts in front of people lots of different things to distract them from any channel that they're watching. Then at the end of that video, there's something else about that topic, but from somebody else's channel that YouTube will push in front of that viewer. And so with that in mind, you want to keep yours as short and concise as possible when it goes to the video experience. You want to jump into the content as soon as possible when it comes to the video experience. It's not to say that you don't want to jump into the content on an audio experience. It's just to say that on the audio experience, your listener tends to love you a little bit more and know you by name and follow you because they like you more than they generally do on YouTube, where they're just looking for content. Basically watch like 3 or 4 or 5 different people anytime that they have a question. So just remember, when it comes to the audio experience, we're looking for an intro that really talks about the pain med versus the vitamin and is 15 seconds or less. Remember, the trailer was 17 seconds or less. The intro is hopefully 15 seconds, maybe up to 20 if you have to. But on your YouTube videos, you want to see what you can do to even cut that more or get rid of it completely. One idea that I can give you to get rid of the introduction completely on YouTube that we've done for a lot of clients is something called an animated logo, a logo animation. You could probably call it either one, animated logo or logo animation. It's basically your podcast artwork. And it's just a couple of seconds where your artwork kind of moves. It's animated. And so if you've got a logo that, I'm just going to use the Taco Bell, that is a logo animation. They got the bell and it goes ding, and that's it. You're just a bell and it's a ding. And that is their logo animation. So they don't really have a whole different thing. You can just get that quick logo animation where it moves, it's your branding, and it might be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. So it's not even a full intro. It's just a logo animation or an animated logo. All right. Next, we've talked about the intro. We talked about the timing for the intro. We talked about some best practices for the intro. Let's talk about advertisements. This is important. We need to talk about advertising. Many people listening, you and somebody else might be thinking, I want to monetize my show. So I'm going to get as many ads and advertisers as I humanly can. And you might even say, this one guy or this one girl who has a popular YouTube channel or popular podcast has like 6 or 7 or 3 or 4 or 10 advertisements. And some of them are 30 seconds. Some of them are 10 seconds. Some of them are a minute or 90 seconds. And so you think to yourself, that's the right way to do it. I've got to have a shit ton of advertisers and advertisements. Well, here's what I've got to say, that if your main goal is to hook listeners, get listeners or viewers connected to your podcast, the more ads, the advertisements that you have, the more likely that viewer or listener is going to get bored. They're going to go away, because during the advertisement, when that's happening, they kind of forget where we are going with the content. And that makes them generally leave in the middle of an advertisement. I try to be real sensitive with my ads. I have an ad about my own service on most of my episodes. So I've got a company. It's called Grow Your Show. We do a couple of things. We take off all of the hard work for podcasters. So basically, we do all the editing and post-production and emailing the guest and creating all the promotional materials and posting it to your social. And so sometimes I'll have an advertisement that just says, hey, we can do this for you. And another thing we do is paid ads, paid marketing. We run the campaigns to get you in front of more listeners. We've got people that come to us and they basically have never been in front of anybody. Their podcast is like crickets. So let me click the cricket button. Their podcast is being heard by maybe just themselves, and or maybe it's being heard by their family or just a few listeners, but no more than 300. And they get frustrated because they're like, how do I grow this thing? I've tried everything that everybody's told me and I still am not in front of enough people. And so what we do is we run paid marketing ads to pull people toward the podcast that are proven, that we've done for a long time. It's expensive, costs a lot of money. It's a pretty penny, but we do that. And so I have some other advertisements that just mention this in the middle of the episode. And so the way that I do it is the way that I'm suggesting that you do it. You know what you're going to talk about after the ad, okay? You already have an idea of where you're going to go. So for example, for me right now, I'm talking about teasers, and then I talked about intro, and I'm talking about advertising, and I'm also going to talk about music in the outro. And then I've got these 5 things that are just foolproof that have to happen, whether you're doing an audio experience or video experience. I've got these 5 like big keys, and they're important. They're going to help you to be able to maintain a viewership or a listenership, depending on your audio experience or your video experience. But you got to make sure you do all 5 of these things. So with me, the way I've got this going through my head is I'm going to talk about the teaser, the ads. I'm going to talk about the intro, and I'm going to talk about the outro and the music. And then I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to say something like, I'm going to get to these 5 things that you need. I'll mention it to you because it is important for you. I'll say, hey, I'm going to get to these 5 things, but let's take a quick break. I'm going to get to these 5 things first. Quick word from our sponsor. And then it'll just be me as a sponsor. It's a quick like 15 or 30-second ad, right? Think about it. And then we come back in. And when I come back in from the ad, what you're going to hear is, all right, we've already talked about these things, and now we're talking about these things. So here's the takeaway for you. When it comes to the advertisements, one of the things that I do is I try to do what I learned when I was 5 years old. What did I learn when I was 5 years old? Well, at 5, I lived in a very small house on a farm. We had chickens. We had a small farm, like a couple of acres, and we had a couple of dogs, and we had this front porch. And I remember I would jump off of the porch with grocery sack and think that I was parachuting. And on Saturdays, it was cartoon day. And my name is Adam, and there's a show that I've always wanted to be healthy and strong. So back when I was 5 on this farm, I would watch on Saturdays He-Man, because I think his name was Abel or Adam. It was one of the names that I have. My name's Adam Abel Adams, AAA, right? So it was like, by the power of Grayskull, I am He-Man. So this guy that related to me, that was a normal guy, turned into He-Man, and he was powerful. And I remember getting excited about that, except there was something that always happened. And I got frustrated because they would need their commercial break. They would have to do that because the TV needs to make money. And I remember that they did this thing basically called a cliffhanger, which means that He-Man was about to do something incredible. He-Man was going to do something that I really wanted to see. I can't miss that. So what they will basically do as they go to commercial break, they will say a couple things. They will show something that's getting to a part where you're going to remember because he's hanging on a cliff. It's a cliffhanger. It's something that's about to happen. So they get you excited about that. And then they say, we'll be right back. Find out what happens to He-Man at the end of these messages. And we'll be right back. And then they have their commercial break. And then they come back and the rest happens. That's exactly what I do on my commercial break. I go back to when I was 5 years old. I relearn what I learned then when I was on this farm watching He-Man. And I get you excited. I want you to know that there's something good to happen. So I'm going to finish talking about teasers, intro, ads, outro, and music. And then I'll say something like, get ready for these 5 things. These are the things you have to do. And we'll be right back. I'll jump off. It'll be a quick commercial about something that I sell. And then you'll hear me jump back on and give you, again, I'll wrap it up and then I'll tell you what we're about to learn. And that way you won't miss anything. So remember, when you are doing your ads, if you're doing ads, A, have as few ads as possible. B, don't just have your company or yourself insert it wherever the heck you want. If you do that, it's going to be confusing. Like imagine if I was watching He-Man and they didn't do it, if they didn't put it at a part where I needed to see it, then they just put it at a random part, any old random part. And they didn't even tell me that they would be right back. This is what most podcasters are doing. This is a huge problem. Most podcasters, when they want the ads, they just say, oh, just put it in the middle. If it's a 20-minute episode, just put it exactly at the 10-minute. Or they'll do a little bit more. They'll do a little bit more, not a lot more. And they'll basically say, hey, at some place, I'm going to ask a question. They're going to answer it. And then I want you to go into an advertisement somewhere in the middle-ish. So if I've got a 20-minute episode, put it anywhere between the 5 to 15-minute mark, somewhere in the middle. And I'll ask a question, they'll answer it. Then you splice this in. And then when it comes back in, I'm just going to be asking a different question. Well, that confuses the listener too, because they don't really remember where we were going. And because there's no cliffhanger, there's no, we'll be right back. There's no getting you excited. Remember the name of the game on that last episode when we were the last solo episode? What were we talking about? Incite curiosity. So before an ad, you want to incite curiosity. So teasers, we talked about the intro being short. We talked about advertisements, having as few as possible and making sure to utilize what's called a cliffhanger. Let your listener or your viewer know what's going to happen after, or give them an idea, get them excited, get them curious about what's going to happen after so that they're ready for it. And then you might wrap it up. All right. So let's talk about the outro. You want an outro that basically is going to help your listener to take the next step for them. So for a lot of our clients, people that we work with, that next step happens to be scheduling like what's called a discovery call. I call it a discovery call. For me, a discovery call is when I ask you questions of my potential client. I ask you questions to see if we're right fit for each other. I ask you how long you've been doing it, what your goals are, what you're looking for, why did you call us, stuff like that. And then you'll ask us questions like, how does it look like to work with you? How much does it cost? How long is the commitment? You'll ask stuff like that. And that'll be our, what I call a discovery call. And at the end of the call, you and I can decide if I think I should serve you and if I think I can, and if you think that I'm the best person to be able to support your podcast. That's what I call a discovery call. Other people have things that they call like mini consultation, or they'll call it introductory call, or they'll call it a sales call, or they'll call it something else. You can call it whatever you want, just as long as it makes sense to your listener. And so an outro, some people call this an extro because you're exiting the podcast. I call it outro because it's what's taking us out of the podcast. You're going to have a call to action. Another way to use this term, an outro or call to action, is just simply CTA, call to action. So basically, what that means is you're going to think of, how do I get my perfect listener to take the next step? So for example, if on that episode we're talking about, for my podcast, if we're talking about microphones or headsets or webcams or multiple cams or switchers, video switcher, then I might say, hey, you can go and look for some of these video switchers by going to growyourshow.com/PDF. And you can either download the PDF or you can just scroll down and you can see what I'm talking about with the video switcher. And this is going to be one that I recommend that you could use if you needed multiple camera angles. That could be the call to action, the outro, which supports, helps you as a listener if that's what you're looking for. So remember, we talk about stuff in the podcast, and then when we exit the podcast, you want to call your person to action. What do you need to do to take the next step? Hey, we talked about video switchers. This is where you go. Hey, we talked about microphones. This is where you go. This is where you go if you want to schedule the call. It's free. And then you give them the website. So these are the things that you'll do in the outro. Now, for the outro, here's the considerations. A lot of your listeners and on YouTube as well. So both on the audio experience and on the video experience. A lot of the people that are part of the podcast have learned or will learn that they can fast forward a certain amount of times. They can push forward by 15 seconds, forward by 15 seconds. Now they've gone 30 seconds. That's how long your outro is. Now they don't have to listen to it. So here's some ideas, because we're talking about keeping listeners engaged and keeping viewers watching. Here's a couple of ideas in order to make that transition less likely to drop people off. First idea for your outro is keep them as short as you can. Here's a problem that I hear, that I've seen and heard. I guess you do hear it technically. And I see these podcasters come in, they become our clients. And prior to working with us, they've got this outro that says like, subscribe to the podcast and do this and do this, and make sure that you follow and leave a like and a comment and go to our website and schedule a discovery call and do this. Basically, because it gives them 3 or 5 or 10 different things that they can do at the end of the podcast, what ends up happening is most of them don't do it. Secondarily, because they give them like 10 things, their brains shut off. Also, on top of that, because they're offering multiple different things, they don't know which one to do. And on top of that, because you're offering multiple things and it becomes like a 2-minute outro, extra, because it becomes like 2 minutes or a whole minute or more, they're going to say to themselves, dang, I can just fast forward this by, I've got 2 minutes left of the podcast. I'm pretty sure I'm at the end. I'm just going to go fast forward by 15 seconds, 8 times, and I can go and listen to the next episode. So they're just going to go fast forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and they will miss the entire outro. So here's a way to fix it. Instead of having, let's just say, 5 different calls to action on one outro that is, let's just say, 1 minute and 20 seconds. Each one is about 20 seconds, okay? I don't know if I'm doing the math right. 1 minute and 40, because each one is about 20 seconds, all right? And now you switch it to maybe having 5 different outros that are only 20 seconds. So on one, it says, hold up right there before you go. Let me just tell you about this one thing. You might have a different one that says, one thing that I forgot that I rarely mention is this other thing. And then you have a third outro that says, I've got something that can help you. Here's how it can help you, and here's how to find it. And then you got a fourth outro that says, if you're looking to improve your XYZ, I suggest you go to this webpage and click the button at the top right. It's a green one, and schedule a call with me. And then on the fifth one, it says something very similar. But here's what you notice. Each of the outros starts out a little bit differently. Did you notice that? One of them asks a question. One of them might propose a statistic. One of them might say, hey, I forgot something, or don't go, or just different things. What ends up happening is the person listening, they don't get locked in and saying, oh yeah, this is that same 2-minute outro. They're like, wait, is this something different? And so they basically helps them with the curiosity. And because it's not 2 minutes long or 1 minute and 40 seconds long, it's just 20 seconds long, they're less likely to need to fast forward it. And so they're more likely to hear it each and every time. So that's something you can do with the outro. Now, let's talk about the music. For your podcast, you want to keep listener engaged. If you want to keep a viewer watching, sometimes you can utilize music. So here's just a couple of ideas. First and foremost, your music needs to be, maybe it doesn't need to be, but I think it's best to be unique to you. This means original theme music. We have too many podcasters out there that have the same exact music. They go to the same websites to get free music, or to get music where you just pay like $20 for the rights to use it on top of the rights that 100 other podcasters are already using it. And now they've just got something that sounds cool, but it's not their own unique brand. It's not their own audio brand. You got a video brand, a visual brand, a logo brand, a color scheme, And you've also got your audio brand. That is you and your voice. That is also the music that you use with your show. That's your audio brand. So the Taco Bell ding, that is a very quick, simple audio brand. You would never hear the Taco Bell ding on anybody else's commercial. Even if they had a bell, Taco Bell uses the same exact sound, and it keeps it short and simple. You've got to have your own audio brand as well. And so that's the first thing that I suggest with your music is make sure that is original theme music, not just something that you've paid or got for free. Let's just say you paid $20 to use something that 100 other podcasters in your space are using. And when people, your listener comes, they don't have any originality. They think that it's this other podcast that they hate. You need to have your own audio brand so that they can start to love just your show. So that's the teaser. That's the intro. That's the ads. That's the outro and the music. We're going to go to that commercial break that I mentioned to you before. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the 5 absolutes that you have to do if you want to maintain a listenership and a viewership on your podcast. We'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. We're back. You're listening to the podcast on podcasting. And prior to the break, I mentioned that we're going to talk about the non-negotiables, these 5 big things. First, I'll mention that on the last episode, we talked about thumbnails, camera angles, proposed questions on the video, and what to wear and how you could act. On the beginning of this episode, prior to that little break, we talked about the teasers, the intro, the advertising, the music, and the outro and the music. Now we're talking about these 5 things that you just must follow. You have to. You have to find a way to be able to follow this, or else you're absolutely going to lose listeners. This is like the important stuff. And the first thing is to be able to utilize humor whenever possible. So, for example, oftentimes I will say something wrong. I'll mess up my words. I'll say it wrong. And I actually prefer to keep that in the show. So, because humor can be a good part of your podcast, rather than, there's blooper moments where you're like, that got so messed up. I don't need to leave that in because it's distracting in the middle of a podcast. And it's better to use like a blooper reel, a highlight reel on some other like unique episode where it's just the bloopers, for example. You wouldn't use that when you're having your actual podcast and you kind of mess up and you can laugh at yourself about it. That's a benefit. Go ahead and keep that in. So anytime I do that, anytime that I make that mistake, I'll just laugh at myself and I'll let it stay. I use humor in other ways. Sometimes when I'm with a guest and they say something, I'll just poke fun at the guest. If I've got the relationship, if I can say it with love, so that they're not going to be like, what a bastard. Like, why was that guy being a dick to me while he was interviewing me? Why was he condescending to me? I'm not looking to be condescending. I'm not looking to be a dick or called a bastard. This is not what I'm looking for. What I'm hoping for is that I can be playful and have that banter, have that genuine like feel like we're brothers or like we're friends or we're family. Like that's my sister that I'm interviewing. We get along, we can tease each other a little bit and it's all okay. So with utilizing the first of the 5 things that I'm ending this episode with is humor. I might even write out a joke. Sometimes I will definitely be willing to laugh at myself most of the time. Some of the things need to be bloopers and they need to push off to a blooper episode by itself, right? But at the same time, I want to be able to be myself. I want to be able to invite my listener to have a good time and to smile every now and again. So I will laugh at myself. And then lastly, I will poke fun or tease with my guest every now and again. Sometimes I just catch myself doing like a random, that's what she said joke. I watched a lot of The Office and I just think it's funny. And so I might be like, that's what she said, or do something that it kind of breaks the tension and it gets the listener back to, oh, this is an approachable person because we're going ahead and utilizing that humor to laugh at ourselves, to laugh at each other, to not take things too seriously. That can really help your listener to be able to stay engaged. So what else do we need to be engaged on these 5 big things? Humor. Number 2, value. I'm hoping that as you've listened to this episode and also on the last episode where we talked about viewers watching, like the thumbnails, the camera angles, proposing the questions on the screen and what you might wear, I'm hoping that you got some takeaways. I'm also hoping that in the beginning of this episode, as we talked about teasers and ads and music and outros and intros, that you got some real takeaways. I'm hoping that as I'm talking about this value now, that you're like, man, I've got to make sure it does have some value. It shouldn't just be funny. It should also have some type of value. Now, the third takeaway is educational. For most of my people that we work with, most of the people, if you're listening and you're that person who's likely to want to work with Grow Your Show to be able to offload some stuff or to help you by doing paid ads, you're probably in the realm of wanting to offer services to your listener, which means that you want to educate them on the show and you want to educate them after the show. So for example, I've got a service-based business and I can help and support you, not just on the podcast, but actually in real life where my team handles your podcast. So this is education. So during this episode and all of the episodes, I do my best to give something educational. Even if I'm just talking about something that's more mindset wise, I will try to liken it. I will try to use stories to be able to move it in. Do you remember the time I think it was this episode that I talked about growing up on the farm and watching He-Man? That story allowed you to remember how to utilize the ads. That if all I did was just gave you the education by itself in a dry way without the background of you visualizing me as a 5-year-old jumping off with my grocery sack, thinking that I was parachuting and sitting in front of the TV on a Saturday. If I didn't explain it through all of that, then it would be less likely for you to remember it, to be able to have a takeaway when you went somewhere else. But now you've got that takeaway because I used that story. So education with stories. Write that down. Education with stories. Education as much as possible and with stories to make it stick. You've also heard me talk about the story about, that's his name, the cave person, because he found fire and he figured that he had to draw his line in the sand and tell everybody that his people aren't going to have deaths by saber-toothed tiger. And if they say on that other side, they're going to have deaths with saber-toothed tigers. So come on this side. When we use that story, this is a fictitious story. I made it up. Maybe it's true. Maybe there was literally a guy named and he found fire and maybe the whole thing's true. But I did make it up more as parable or an analogy to support you to remember how do you draw a line in the sand. Same thing. I'm talking about utilizing ads and showing you what a cliffhanger needs to be and getting people excited to come back. Then I utilize this story or I tell this story about me when I was 5, when I first learned this so that you can have that takeaway. So education with story. Number 1 was humor. Number 2 is value. Number 3 is education with stories. Number 4 is entertainment. Now there is humor and then there is entertainment. They're just slightly different. Think about humor being funny and entertainment being engaging. Funny meaning it breaks up the mood. It lightens up the mood. It makes you smile. When you smile, you are more likely to learn. So I want you to smile with me. And entertaining is another part of that, similar, but not exactly the same thing. You want it to be entertaining. You don't want it to be too long or boring or drawn out. This is one of the reasons why I went ahead and split this into 2, is to be able to give you smaller chunk and then another smaller chunk. Instead of having like an hour and a half episode, we've got like a 30-ish and a 45-ish minute episode, but on the same-ish topic. And it's going to help you to be able to have more of the takeaways. I didn't break this up because I wanted to magically have more episodes. I didn't break this up because I wanted to get more downloads or some random thing like that. I broke it up because I knew that you can learn just enough at a time to really can learn. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you, I and you and other people listening really have an easier time to learn a couple things at a time slowly than to just have the whole dang thing. Here's a couple of examples. So I'm learning Spanish right now. I've got this app called Duolingo. And basically what I do is I spend 5 to 25 minutes a day, and I'm on there almost every single day. So let's say in a month goes by, I might miss like 4 days. I'm there almost every single day. Let's say 25 days a month. Okay. 25 days a month. If I needed to just sit there and go through all, after like 100 days or so, I'm at like the 13th chapter or the 13th group of lessons. And what I did was try to do it all in one day. I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am. I wouldn't have learned as much as I've learned. I'm not saying I'm fluent yet, but if I tried to learn Spanish all in one day, my brain wouldn't be able to make all those connections. But by doing a little bit here and there on a consistent basis, I'm able to learn and add to what I've already learned and be able to repeat and practice what I've already learned and then learn a couple other things alongside with it. Over time, it's going to be a lot better for me to do the practice of Spanish or the practice of weightlifting. Same thing. If I was like, hey, I want to weightlift 7 hours a week, that's a shit ton. That's probably too much. I want to lift 7 hours a week. And I'm just going to make it easy on me. I'm just going to do all 7 hours just on Sunday. Then on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I can do whatever the heck I want. It's not going to work. You can't just do all of your stuff, 7 whole hours all at once. It's much better to do like an hour and 10 minutes, 6 days a week, for example. And now you're able to grow and get stronger and compound on and add to what you've already gained in strength. Same thing with Spanish. Same thing on these episodes. It's one of the reasons, as I was mentioning, why did I split it up and do like a 30 and then like a 45-ish? And it's basically because I want you to be entertained. I want you to get some of the humor, some of the value, some of the education. And there's that. What's the fifth thing? The fifth thing is kind of actually a repeat of something that we talk about a lot on this podcast. It is the hook story offer. So hook story offer kind of means, in a way, I'm going to give it to you 2 ways. It's tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. So let your listener know what they're going to get out of today's episode. And then you give them the value for today's episode with stories and all these things that I'm learning, that we're learning together right now. And then when you end, you tell them what they can do after. You like wrap it up, you repeat back, and then you tell them what their next step is. So hook is a way to like grab their attention, let them know what's going to happen. Story is sharing with them what you really want them to know. And hopefully using examples of what you and your client are doing, you and a past client did, or somebody else in this field did, even if they aren't your client. Maybe you haven't had a client yet. And so you could still have a story about somebody, or you could have a story about yourself when you first started. And you'll share that. For example, I did the He-Man story. I did the story to learn those analogies, those parables. And then you will end with the offer. You'll end with, here's what you got to do. So humor, number 1, value, number 2, education, number 3, with stories, if possible, entertainment, number 4, the hook story offer process, number 5. And the bonus is what we talked about at the end of a previous episode. At the end of the previous episode, it's whatever this episode number is minus just 2. It was part 1 of how to keep viewers watching and listeners engaged. It was part 1 of that. You could go back and you could listen to it. At the end of that, we really talked about just being yourself. Like, remember at the end of talking about whatever you should be wearing on your podcast, I said it was also really important for you to just be your genuine self, who you are, act how you do around your friends, your family, your spouse, the girls, the boys, your kids, whatever. I want you to be that. I want you to continue to be that. So utilize humor, make sure you're giving value, some education with some stories so it can stick. Keep it entertaining as much as possible. Be yourself and utilize hook story offer as a template to make these episodes keep your listeners engaged or keep your viewers watching. All right, that was today's episode. And what I'm excited about is the next episode being an interview episode. I will see you there. You're not alone if you're ready to either get your very first affordable microphone or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to some legit podcasting studio equipment. Because on all of the forums over the last few months, I'm seeing this all the time. Even my own personal clients that work with my team, they're ready to get that next microphone. They're asking us for it. Additionally, when I'm on discovery calls with potential clients, they're always asking for this stuff. Hey, what mic do you recommend? Hey, what lighting do you recommend? What webcam should I be using? So many questions. And so what we did, my whole team has put together a PDF so that if you're one of those people who is looking to either get your very first affordable microphone, or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to more professional podcast studio equipment, whether it's soundproofing or whatever, we've got you covered by going to growyourshow.com/PDF. And you can download the PDF for free, or right there on the webpage is everything that you would have and you don't need to download the PDF. Either way, just go to growyourshow.com/PDF, which will put you to the podcasting equipment that me and my team have personally vetted. I'll see you on the next episode.